I'm excited to share with you a recent podcast with video that just went out. These are two very special men. One is Charlie Ford. He's the podcast host. He's just a beautiful man. And his voice is very special. Thus, he does our podcast. The only thing better than his voice is his heart. And Charlie is hosting in this podcast Josh Curry. Josh might be the wisest man I know, despite of age. This man is just wise. Josh is doing what we call spirit school. He essentially packed up everything, and including his wife and dog, got this little bitty sleep-in trailer, which is about all it is, and took off and just hit the road for months, living with minimal hunting and gathering food as needed, sitting out, being out in the weather by intention. It's just amazing, his story. He calls this Spirit School. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. I know that I loved it. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining this episode of Thumos School for Men. Today we have Josh Curry here with us. Josh, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing great.
Josh, you were on with us a few episodes ago, probably 10 or 20 ago, and you were describing some other things that you were doing in life. So if you haven't heard his previous podcast, be sure to go check out Josh in his previous one. Today, we're going to focus really on something that you've been doing lately, and you'll tell us all about it. So let me just hand it over to you and just kind of maybe you can give a little bit of background as to where you are in life right now, and what you're kind of currently going through.
Okay. So before this big adventure I'm about to describe, I was the youth director at Pelican Athletic Club in Mandeville. So I was running the youth programs. It was all athletic stuff and physical fitness, strength and conditioning. Running adult programs, personal training, working with some rehab people. But that's just the backdrop. I gave up most of that for about an 8-month break in total. Passed it off to a few other people and just started doing personal training online via the phone, leaving workouts for people. And it's because my wife and I had been preparing for a year and a half to go on a camping trip across the US, visit as many states as possible, camping the whole way, visiting friends and family when we can. We stayed at state parks, farms from August 30th until December 5th. Yeah, we went to a bunch of eastern states, so all east of the Mississippi. We visited Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. And my wife had to give up her job to make that happen. So she's welcome back when she comes back if she wants to have the same job. But we basically just had to take a pretty big leap here and do a lot of preparation. But we both knew it would be some of the best times of our life before we had kids. And it's something that we needed to pull the trigger on now, or it was never going to happen until we were retired, which happens to a lot of people. So we decided to just do it, go for it. We knew that the payouts would be enormous and what we would learn about each other and just life in general. So we went for it. And in a week, we head back out west. We've been at home for about a month with the family, just going to parties and visiting people and enjoying the holidays. But let's see, January 18th, we head out west. We'll be going through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, California, and Oregon.
So you so let me just get this straight. For a year and a half, you and your wife prepare for this.
Yes.
Then you both quit your jobs essentially
Yes.
to go on what you're calling an adventure.
Yes.
And that's within the United States, moving along, going to different states. What you mentioned that this is something you wanted to do before retirement, but why? Why did you decide to do this?
I think just in general, the value of experiencing different perspectives for yourself and getting to see the perception of other people, or reverse, the perspectives of other people, it's just invaluable. And you can only do so much in a local space and a certain job in a given time. So it's beneficial to travel for that reason if you're treating it as such. If you're treating it as an opportunity to just learn and experience and know something new you've never known before, I think it's invaluable. And so for me, it was something I always wanted to do. Obviously, things like that are usually cost or time prohibitive. So we had to come up with some creative solutions to that. But I think anybody that has that kind of mindset of just wanting to learn, travel for the sake of learning is just invaluable.
Well, yeah, and you, I mean, I've known you for some time now, and I've always felt like you were wise beyond your years. You're still pretty young. How old are you now?
33.
33. So 33 years old and deciding to do this, which most people won't do even after retirement for other reasons. But you decide to pick up and do this now, which is pretty cool. And you've shared with me and in the Thumos community some of the lessons you've learned. And so that's really the topic for today is like, let's dive into, you know, as you kind of started the journey, what kind of viewpoints you've seen and some of the things that you've learned, and we can take it however you want to take it in the bullet points you want to use, and just go from there. But this is really super interesting. So take your time, no rush, just uh, all ears.
All right. So I guess to preface it, my wife and I both wanted to not only learn about more about the natural landscape of this giant country we're in and actually see the nature of it, but we wanted to learn about what's available in life and what do we like or dislike about what is available. So we wanted to know that, but we also just got married last March. So we also wanted to know about each other. And we're both people that when a conflict comes up, we address the conflict for the sake of resolution, not for the sake of winning or trying to prove the other person wrong. We always come to the conclusion that it needs to be about resolution. So because we work well together like that, we decided what better way to start off a marriage than to spend a lot of quality time together, but also address all of the problems as fast as you can. And it just seemed like a better time to do it than when you have your first child and you're sleep deprived. And so I thought maybe we should let shit hit the fan now, deal with problems, see how we tackle them together, both physical, organizational, emotional. And obviously we knew enough about each other to commit to marriage, but it's a whole different thing. I'm assuming with every year of marriage, there's just new challenges, but I did know for sure we probably sped through the first couple of years in a few months of what kind of challenges would pop up. So I'll start with the stuff about marriage or about, it really just applies to people in general. And it has a lot to do with our language. And I came to this conclusion a while back when I was practicing, when we were still in our home. I was practicing every now and then just being silent for a day. And I would just write a note ahead of time. If I had to talk to anybody, I would just show them the note. Hey, I'm not talking today, to practice observing and listening. If I ever had to communicate with them with something that body language or posture didn't dictate, then, just write it down. But what I started learning, the very beginnings of the lesson, I guess, was that language is mostly a barrier to observation and empathy. So we frequently use it in ways I think it doesn't serve us. The real purpose of language is to describe something in detail in an efficient and effective way. But a lot of times I find we overuse it, and it's almost like we're trying to use it to serve ourselves, to be understood about a certain thing, or maybe just even to talk, to just feel important, or you're just talking out of habit maybe. But when I started being silent on this trip, I really started to realize, I was like, wow, I'm never more empathetic with my wife than when I'm not talking. It's like the more I talk, the more I'm not listening. And what's really cool is when you start being quiet for an extended period of time, there's certain things in your mind that just start falling away. You don't have a a want to say something after someone says something, which is kind of a weird phenomenon. Like someone can just say something and you can just sit there in silence and it just feels okay and perfect. Um, but also you start seeing things that you didn't normally see. I'm assuming it's just because if I'm kind of down regulating my use of my auditory abilities, I'm probably up regulating other senses. And so I noticed that I was seeing things, I was observing things, whether it was actual objects or details of a room or an area, or just the behavior of people. I was noticing more about them. And it started making me think about our pets and how they don't have language as a way to communicate with us. They don't have the luxury of being able to say a bunch of bullshit or like go through a bunch of iterations, and they only want a few things and they need to get those ideas across. And they do it surprisingly well most of the time. And they do it all with body posture. They do it with their eyes. There's a lot of power behind silent communication. So I definitely started to realize that if I want to get more empathetic with my wife, if I want to see her perspective, or if I just simply want to take in more details and remember more about a certain situation, I just need to not talk. And it's that simple. And I found it to be profound. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Have you ever heard of people taking a day of silence just because?
I've heard of silent retreats, where people are, there's a popular one around these parts that's a silent retreat. So I've heard that. I have to confess, I have never gone a full day without talking. And so as you describe this, I will say that I have intentionally decided to not respond during either an argument or a disagreement with my wife. And not responding has been extremely beneficial for for everyone involved. But it also makes me realize that what I really like to hear you say is the observation. You can observe more, and I really hadn't thought about it like that before. Being able to observe more, so it just gives me something to think about there. The next time I'm quiet, instead of just being quiet because I don't want to say anything that might be, untrue or something superficial. Now thinking of it in a way from an observation standpoint is a totally different perspective. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between like holding your tongue for a moment or deciding to be quiet for 10 minutes compared to hours or days, especially in front of other people. There's just that thing that turns off where you're not even suppressing your speech. You just simply don't want to. So it's totally different in how it feels. And that's something that I didn't quite feel until I was not speaking for several hours. But it was around that point where it kind of flipped. And I can say with a lot of experience now that when I was on the road, when I was silent by myself, it definitely helped with observation. But in terms of the empathy, or in terms of observing human patterns of behavior, I really needed to be around people and be silent for the real learning to happen. So it's one thing to sit in silence by a tree, but if anybody's listening that wants to try to get these benefits, I would recommend be silent around people for an extended period of time. But
How does that relate to your ego?
it definitely makes you see after the fact, like how unimportant a lot of the things you say are. Like, like you'll have a want to say something, and then the moment will pass because you were silent, and then the conversation keeps going. And then about 2 minutes later, you're looking at the conversation flowing and what everybody knows, and you're just like, I never needed to talk at all. Like, so it's pretty cool in that way. And I'd say that's what I felt most of the time when I was silent, was like, man, I just didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to say it at all. And then the moments where you do feel like, man, despite me not being able to talk, like I feel like right now is a very important time to communicate. That's when something like a hug or like smiling at somebody with like a thumbs up, like those little things coming from a background of silence, and then that action, it's just a profound backdrop. And you notice that like this one little action now means so much more. It's almost like a drop into a bucket of still water. So you drop it in the still water, you definitely see some ripples. If it's waving, you drop it in there, you don't know what the fuck you just threw into the fray. So that's what I really felt. That was really cool.
That is really cool. Wow.
Yeah, very.
Very neat.
And so going on to some other things about language I learned was one thing that I adopted, or I tried to. I mean, it's very difficult to do, but one thing I intend and have been doing to do with my wife and the way I communicate is not ever saying the way, or not using the word the when I'm talking about how something should be done, or not the way, but a way or one way. So it's both that phrase, the phrasing of those words, but that general idea of if you are disagreeing about something because you think something is more optimal this way, or it is efficient or effective this way, there are a lot of ways to do almost anything. And so if you're just attaching an idea that you want to support and calling it this is the best, or this is the most optimal, or this is the most effective or efficient, on one hand, you're lacking humility by a long shot. On the other hand, you're almost stunting the creativity of the future person that you're communicating with. And I think that applies a lot to children as well. But imagine if you're talking to a child and they do something terribly wrong. It's like obviously like they're sweeping with the wrong side of the broom. You're like, all right, this isn't a good way. But let's say they start sweeping away different than you have, and you say, no, 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 this is the way, and you show them your way. Well, one, you just told them they're wrong and then put them in a little box. But two, this creative little being may now begin to try to search for the optimal, the effective, the right way, instead of using their natural gift of sprawling into a bunch of different behaviors and exploring. And that's really what the future, why we look to the future and why we value children in that way, is because they're going to come up with shit that's going to floor us. And I know that most parents have heard something coming out of the mouth of their child and they're like, holy shit. Like, I didn't know you were ever going to teach me anything. You're 7. But every now and then something like that comes out. And I think those things that come out really happen when they have a mind that is more free to do certain, more free to just explore. That's not to say you can't show them your way, but just if you show them your way, you gave them an effective way to do something. But if you said, this is the way, this is the right way, you eliminated all that creativity. So I think the best of both worlds when dealing with children for sure is give them a solution in case their creative ones don't quite work out. But don't try to stunt either, and don't ignore giving them a possible answer. But I think the reason that really speaks to people in a relationship as adults is we all have some inner child. And when we're our most emotional or tender or defensive, that inner child is going to be the thing that is taking the beatings or taking the wins. And so it's useful to speak in that way because you're essentially speaking in that moment to the mind of a child. They don't want to hear something like, this is the way because it's my way, in that kind of general idea. And I see people do it in a lot of different ways. We're all guilty of it. I'm probably more guilty than most. But yeah, that it was very powerful when I started realizing not the way, but a way or one way. And I started
Well,
looking at all kinds of different age groups, and I think it applies.
that's another brilliant insight. It's a reminder. I think of number one is I think of all the inadvertent, just unintentional, almost subconscious words that come out of people's mouths because it's just ingrained in them. It's trained. It's something you've been doing since you were a child, right? So there's words that come out like you say, this is the way, that might not even be the intent when the person is saying it, and
Correct.
it's just rolling out of their tongue because of habit or just routine, right? And one of the words that comes up for me for that I've heard recently, and it goes perfectly in line with what you just said, is the word should. How many times have I said the word you should to my kids? You should. I mean, right off the bat, that completely diminishes all creativity on their part. And I even told him that I actually after I read that or I listened to it on a podcast, I went and told him that I want to try to avoid ever saying you should, because that is automatically diminishing.
Yes.
And I did and I've never intended it that way. But to your point, language is so powerful, and yet it's like we have a tremendous tool and we don't even have full control over it, because most of the stuff that comes out of our mouth is just it's sort of just routine, right? It's habit. And so language is powerful. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think language has evolved in the way we use it today versus you know our ancestors long ago?
Yeah, I do. I think that in general is human social development continued, um, as we went from roaming families to tribes to villages to states to kingdoms, empires, nations, world governments, whatever. I think every step of the way, you need language to speak more about things that don't exist. Whereas if you were living with your family in a Stone Age setting and just having to live for getting food and protection almost all the time, your language probably is going to be a lot more related to where something is, when that thing is there, uh, physical things. Where's the herd of buffalo? Where's how high up is that apple from the tree? What time did you see these things happen? And so I think it has a lot to do with space and time, very little to do with emotion. I feel like the more you group up, the more you have to speak about inner workings, because that helps people be predictive of your own behavior. If you and I can grow up together and you can explain, you can do something, and I can ask you, why did you do that? Or what were your feelings while you did that? Those questions are useful, because if you can describe something to me that I can understand a little bit, and we keep doing this day after day, year after year, eventually we have a pretty good idea of what the other will do. And having predictive behavior in groups is great. If you've ever seen a basketball team that has perfect flow together, it's because they're group coordinated. They know what the other is thinking or going to react like very well. And I think that's critical for a tribal like setting. But then as you start getting above that, I think that's when the language really pops into play for things that don't really have they're not in a place in the world. They're all ideas, like cents and dollars. They're just ideas. They don't actually exist as a thing of a certain shape and structure. They're just money as a whole. It's an idea. Patriotism, honor, like all of those things, they're ideas that you can never point to. You can never pick them up. They don't have a weight, a speed, a momentum. So we talk about all these things that don't exist. And I think that's really the main feature of language. But I do believe that now we overuse it because we think we're being descriptive about something, but we usually are not. Like you said, it's just habitual talking.
You know, you just made me think, is language like technology, in a sense that we if we have advanced in language through these years, um, with great advancement comes great responsibility and also abuse. So I think of language now, like what you're saying, like technology. Technology is wonderful, but obviously, given in the wrong hands, it could be abusive, it could be dangerous, it could be risky, but it's also something that can progress our society. And when I think about language, and based on under the context that you just said, do you think that holds true? Where language, yes, it can be a weapon. I mean, from what you describe, ideologies and ideas and
Correct.
moving people in certain directions, that could be a weapon.
Correct.
Um, and if it is advancing, it's also much needed because of what you said also when you're describing the inner emotions and being able to connect with someone better than you would have in the past. So that's interesting. I guess that's not a question, just a kind of a realization. That's really neat.
Yeah, I do agree that it's a technology. It's like a mathematical and psychological technology keeps developing. But it was funny when you said when you talked about the word should, and I said you didn't want to use that with your kids because that was a core component of really the third big thing I learned about language, which was the words deserve, should, fair, earn, and supposed to are almost dangerous words.
Wait,
And
repeat those words one more time for me again. This is good.
deserve, should. So I'll use it with I, so it sounds more. I deserve, I should, or they should. That's not fair. I earned that. You're supposed to. So deserve, should, fair, earn, and supposed to. I realize that those things, those five statements that we all use all the time, they more often than not are used in a way that I think is a fundamentally bad way to speak and a bad way to support your own consciousness. And in a subconscious way, it gives people almost this whiny, weak, or victim kind of voice that we don't even recognize. And I recognized in myself when I was saying things like this and I'd evaluate it, it slammed me one day that if I'm saying that's like something about the world, that's crazy. They should be like this. This should be happening. That's not supposed to be this way. It's not fair that my mom died. When you talk like that, you're really saying two things in one sentence, but you're saying it in the weakest way possible. What you're really saying is, I don't want this to happen, and I don't think I can do anything about it. You're essentially saying, you're just complaining to the universe. You're complaining to God when you say, that's not supposed to be this way, or they should do this. I'm supposed to be, I'm supposed to be covered when I retire, whatever it is. We say these things all the time. And while I do think these words have value in terms of human agreements, like social contracts, if I do a job, you don't pay me, I think it's a good thing to say that's not fair. But when we're talking about a sphere of influence that's larger than these human contracts we make, if we're talking about life or the universe at large or the way of the world, and you're using these words when you're saying this stuff, you're really just complaining when you really could be saying, I don't like that this is this way, and I want to do something about that. Those two statements are both more honest and more empowering without you complaining to a higher power. And I just realized that when the more I heard this out of my own mouth, the more I was just disgusted by it when I used it in that way. And I just realized for the first time, like, how many iterations of these words have I let flow through my mind year after year? And now you'll see when you start hearing it out yourself or other people, you'll be like, man, sometimes I sound like a whiny bitch. I don't even know it.
Yeah. Oh man, it that totally makes sense. And I think there is something real to the idea that words that are coming out of your mouth, your body feels them. And Bruce Lee said it back in the day. I forget the exact quote that he used, but be careful of the words you choose because your thoughts and your words, your body feels it as real, regardless of whether you're saying it in passing. So it just makes me think all these things that might come out of our mouths, which we think are completely, inconsequential and nothing, and yet they have the impact not only on our thoughts but potentially the energy that we have in our body.
Yeah, definitely.
That is really cool. So you picked all that up on your adventure. This is something that you're out there
Yeah.
roaming the east side of the US and you're realizing this stuff. What do you like? I mean, you've only just shared two things, and I'm just wondering what do you contribute or what do you think is the reason behind you being aware of this and being able to think through these things so deeply?
Uh, One, the space. That's like the arena in which it takes place. Just the space, the physical space, the time. It's that's kind of necessary to let your mind wander in the way that it can. Um, and two, like I was intentional about this from the formation of the idea of the trip. Like I wanted to know more about everything that gets pushed to the side when you have a busy day. And most of the time we have moments in a day that are quiet, but those moments are really just a break from the noise. They are not a space in and of itself in which you can really open up and flourish. I think that's why people go on the weekends or on retreats or on extended vacations of silences. You really need to have a lot of buffer space in order to get to that center realm where you can just wander with your mind. And there's no list in the background. There's no, I have to do this. I'm supposed to do this. It's really the lack of responsibilities, the enormous amount of freedom, and the willingness to just explore your mind and just sit there. And yeah, the longer you sit there and the more time you have after a conversation, you can just unpack that conversation and think about the way you're speaking. And it's crazy. Like when I really thought about it, I was like, all right, when I was working a full day, I might have, a walk from the gym to my car. I might have a drive home. And those are quiet moments. I might have some profound thoughts in those moments. They might come, they might not. But I might have two moments like that in a day, plus a tiny break at home. And besides that, the day was filled mostly with stuff to do, tasks, planning, organization. So even when you have that amount of introspection, or even if you put aside time for meditation or journaling or whatever, it's just a tiny little side quest. It's like doing 30 minutes of Spanish a day compared to moving to Mexico without a translator and just figuring it out and being immersed in the culture. You just learn so much faster. It's you have literally dozens to hundreds of times more free space in a single day than an average person does during a workday. Free mental space. And then on top of that, there's a compounding effect. Because once your brain isn't working the same way it was before, and it's almost built now to just daydream and analyze your own thoughts and mind, like it starts flowing. I mean, you'll be able to fill a journal in a year.
Do you feel any different now that you've been home for a month from your adventure before you head back out, given what you just said?
Yeah, I do feel different. Uh, I was working during this month break, and so that it takes away that mental space for sure. Like just you could, for anybody that hasn't experienced it, you really don't even need to have a busy day. You just to have something that is on your list in the future. If you have anything to do tomorrow at all, then you will not access this mental space that I'm talking about. So it's kind of profound. Like even on a very light day, a day that someone might consider like less than half a work day, it still takes away that mental space despite it being a very relaxing day. Um, so I did find the difference there. It was almost immediate. As soon as there was something to do, just gone. And but I can feel that there's something in the background that is like forever changed, and it's almost like that state is more accessible if I can just wipe the to-do list fully clean.
So the to-do list in that sense almost prevents you from being present.
I wouldn't say present because I can be present with my environment even when I'm busy. Um, that's something I've practiced a lot, but it's not the same. There's almost it's like a flipping back and forth in your mind of being very aware of the present, evaluating the past, and kind of daydreaming away, almost detaching, dissociating from your present moment to almost daydream. And you're kind of switching through those patterns of thinking. And that's what gives you that crazy perspective. but I wouldn't describe it as present.
Wow. So
Most of
this
the
is
time it's
not presence. Wow.
mostly it's reflective of everything that was and is as a whole, and then you compare that to what you are feeling and doing right now, and just keep
Mm.
doing it. Just keep comparing what does now feel like in relation to me thinking about myself in the past and the whole of existence, and just keep. I don't know. It's the best kind of little summary
Yeah.
of it.
Man, I love it. I love your insights. Speaking of your insights, I was going to read a few things. You have, we're part of the Thumos community for those listening, and we use a network with all of our Thumos brothers, and you have posted throughout your adventures some of your big key insights in our network for all of us to kind of learn and understand and grow. And I was just going to read a few of these just to kind of get your perspective on them because to me, I read them I had to read them 2 or 3 times because they're pretty deep, very insightful, and I want to get your take on it. So I'll start with this one. You said self pity is a luxury of the ignorant and the weak. Either your life is not endurable or it is. If it is not, then you have nothing to fear because you're already dead. If it is, then you have nothing to fear because you will endure. I probably butchered that, but anyway, you wrote that, and I thought, wow, what triggered that thought, and maybe you can kind of expand a little bit.
So I was reading something that was uh, there are many like meditations or writings from Roman generals, and there were quite a few statements about self pity, um, and how it was kind of just ridiculous, and so it just made me think about it a little bit, and I realized that self pity is a lot like those 5 words I described, like that kind of sound weak. You're just whining about a situation that you can't really help, or you're unwilling to help. And if you're unwilling to help it, then you're your own solution. So you should just get working, and your self pity is not respectable. If you can't do anything about it, then there's really no point in self pitying because it's unavoidable. It'd be like being sad every single day that it gets dark at night. It's you probably should just work on putting all your efforts into adjusting to reality instead of complaining to nothing. Um, so it's kind of a hard take. It's not like I don't, have empathy for people, but this is something I was really applying to myself also as hard as I could before I ever do want to think about it as a whole for the world. But
Well, that's a. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just saying that all in all, it just seemed ridiculous the more I thought of it. It is a logical dead end, and it doesn't feel good to be in that state. So maybe we should put efforts into not being that way.
Yeah, and I was just going to expand on what you said. I know that you are empathetic, and these statements that you put in our Thumos network were for us to learn from. They are pretty direct and pretty straight, and it really is intended for us to kind of think about these things. Given the fact that we do have empathy and compassion, but like at its core, it's really cool to kind of contemplate some of these things. Well, I have another one I wanted to get your
Yeah.
take on. This is another one that you put into the network, and it goes like this. This is what you wrote. We are so uncomfortable with unanswered questions that we will create habits, rules, or catchy phrases and pretend like they are answers. Sometimes the questions we impose on the world will not and cannot be answered. Live with the weight of that, or you will live your lie. That's pretty damn brilliant.
Thanks. I don't remember exactly what made me think of that, but I do remember when I journaled it. And
So it was around the uncomfortable nature of unanswered questions.
Yeah, it seemed to me that uh, something I recognized in myself was I've always wanted to know a deeper layer to the why of something. Someone told me, trees photosynthesize. That's they get their energy from sunlight. Okay, why? I just always want to go down another level. And that's been true about just everything in my life, really, that I've ever tried to learn. And I started realizing like there's a point of diminishing returns. One, it's good to be curious and explore, but at some point, you're just continuing to ask why about almost nothing. Um, and then you get to a fundamental point where it's too large or too small of a question or a scope for the question why to apply. And that's something that I thought of in myself. And then I started realizing, well, humans kind of just do that all the time. As soon as you're uncomfortable with the way life is, you build a worldview or some slogan or phrase or rule for you to follow so that you can simplify the world into something that is digestible for you and then follow a path in that digestible world you molded for yourself. That's not necessarily a bad thing to do. You might need to take on a mindset like that if you were a soldier getting shipped off to war, for instance. It's probably not very good for you to think in a philosophical view all the time. You probably need to give yourself some kind of condensed version of a lie of what the world is and live that way so you can be operational and functional. But I think when we're seeking truth, as much as we can ever know it, we have to be okay with the fact that in the seeking of truth, sometimes we get to a wall or we get to a boundary where humans cannot possibly know it yet, or it's their questions or things that no conscious entity will ever know or ever be able to verify. And it's when you get to that point that you really just got to back off and be like, yep, you know what? That's a mystery and that's okay. And just infinitely be able to tell yourself or other people, I don't know. It's not only a humble way to be, but it is an accurate way to be. So what I saw in a lot of people was that they would claim to be seeking truth, but they're really just living a small version of the world. If they really tried to consider every single part of reality, their rules and their slogans or whatever they say, they don't apply to the whole world. They only apply to the piece of it that they know or they want to know. And I realized the more you accept what the world is in its entirety, the less you can accurately say about it, which feeds back to the language thing. Sometimes it's better to say less to be more accurate.
You make me wonder if what Jack Nicholson said was true. Can we actually handle the truth?
I don't think I don't think so. I think there are even some questions we ask that we don't even know what the answer would look like. It's yeah, and just in small ways. I find a lot of people do that with very large worldviews. They'll simplify it into things that are really just generalizations or shortcuts.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, let me get, I'll get to another one before you move on with your thoughts on
Yeah.
uh this is
Managing-
another this is really cool. This one I read about 3 or 4 times, so I'm going to say it, and the people listening are probably going to have to replay it because it's pretty solid. Being all right, so here it goes. Being understanding is preventative. Being forgiving is restorative. Being merciful is destructive. And then you go on to give an example of this, and you say, imagine how humans successfully treat bears living in close proximity. We understand that they are scavengers who are curious, powerful, and reactive. We forgive them for their ingresses into cars, dumpsters, and yards, and we humanely relocate them. If they continue to ingress, we show no mercy and we kill them. History has shown us that when we are merciful after repeated transgressions, we lose what we love. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that was something I came up with in bear country, because obviously I was thinking a lot about bears, but it was also something I thought about just in general throughout the trip, because it was just me and my wife, and sometimes in a lot of isolated areas, um, in a lot of states that didn't have very defense friendly gun laws. So a lot of times it wasn't even an option for a weapon of defense. Certainly not on a lot of hikes. So just the constant, the awareness of me being the only thing between a uh, some kind of attack in general, if it were to happen, somebody tried to rob us or hurt us or kidnap my wife, like, it's not unheard of. We saw multiple missing person signs across our trips in the national or state parks. So kind of that threat just made me think, man, I need to kind of I need to cultivate this mindset of, I am unwilling for anything to happen to my wife, more so than I am unwilling to make a mistake with my aggression. Because the only way that I can assure her safety is if I am very swift with my reactivity to a transgression or an aggression or a threat. And that's kind of a weird mindset to go in after living in a suburban area where just everyone you see, like, you just assume you could be friends with them right away. Totally different than being prepared to chop somebody in the head with a hatchet if you had to. So it's almost a scary way to think. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about people's behavior over time, like, how do you balance the perfect amount of aggression for the sake of preserving your life or loved ones, and how do you moderate that reactivity? And I really think the more I thought about it, is like, society at large is set up best when we have understanding and forgiveness in place. There may be some situations where I wouldn't have really waited much longer. It's not like I'm going to forgive somebody after they hurt my wife. It's just an immediate thing. But it made me think about society at large, and we have understanding in order to prevent conflict in the first place. You see that all the time with people nowadays. Almost everyone knows about the behavioral deficits for a lot of people with special needs. And if they're throwing a tantrum in the store and they're like 20 years old, almost everybody in the store understands what's going on. And so they don't cause a problem. That could be an easy source of conflict if we didn't have an understanding for how that person was. So most of us are understanding in a way that prevents conflicts. So if a conflict does happen, it's been shown throughout many, both mathematical models of game theory, but also for a lot of social constructs that we see throughout history, it's best to have some element of forgiveness played in there, because sometimes there are one-off behaviors or they're unfortunate scenarios. You don't want somebody to have a huge loss or a huge problem because of a transgression. And also you want to give people the ability to change, because a lot of times that's one of the most powerful types of people, are the people who went from one extreme to the other. But you have to balance that with the fact of there being people or animals or whatever that will play against your forgiveness if your forgiveness is repetitive. How many times are you willing to be screwed over by someone in a business deal before it's time to not do business with them or to get them arrested? Like, most of us, one would be enough. We might be like, one, we're like, all right, never dealing with you again, whatever, not going to get the law involved, but I'm out of this. Not going to come after you, not vindictive, but that's on me. That's forgiveness. If they somehow scammed you again, you're probably going to get aggressive and you're probably going to get punitive. And everyone I think we talk to would agree that's a good mode of behavior. But I think a lot of times our society preaches compassion in a way that is mistaken for mercy and a lot of the common thought, and just, just always turn the other cheek, just always turn the other cheek. I don't think that's the way. I think if you are understanding at first, you're doing the best you can to prevent conflict. If you're forgiving, then you are being very patient with people's ability to change and learn, and you're providing opportunity and growth. And you're giving yourself an ability to stay out of aggressive or violent or punitive actions. But if it happens again, at that point, you're just gambling with whatever you value, whether it be money or a job or a house or a marriage or whatever, your life. You're just gambling with things at that point. And I don't think many people have it in them nowadays to be as assertive for themselves as they need to be to get the best behavior out of other people or to get the best life for themselves. I think a lot of people allow themselves to be screwed over, even in small ways, over and over again. And they can kind of hide behind this false virtue of mercy, but I really don't think it's a virtue. I think it's a detriment. And I think that the only way, I understand a lot of people don't define mercy that way. They may define mercy as I define forgiveness, but in my definition, I think if you give the understanding, you give the forgiveness, then mercy really has no place at that point.
Well stated. And in that, you talked a little bit about society. You also mentioned at some point that you were grateful for society,
Oh,
and
yes.
you mentioned that in terms of the bubble that we're in as a society and why that's a wonderful thing. And I love what you said there. Do you mind sort of recapping your thoughts on the bubble of society?
Yeah. So that's actually that's the biggest thing that changed for me. Just like my fundamental way of looking at the world. Uh, it's just crazy, absolutely crazy, where and what we live in nowadays. And I didn't really appreciate it as much as I've been camping on survival trips and put myself in nature and make myself uncomfortable and know all of these things about the world. It was so different when they weren't even a possibility. When you might get a lack of food, water, uh, temperature regulation. You might be wet in the middle of the night, like sleep deprived, whatever. A lot of things could go wrong, and they did. And it was crazy when you have all these things happening and you have this realization like, holy shit, this is what this would feel like every day unless I did something about it of my own volition. If we were living in just in nature, there'd be nothing beautiful about this at all. If I'm getting bit by bugs and it's hot as it's 100 degrees in the middle of the night, and then it starts storming, raining, and gets my bedding all wet, and then we lose our source of food to bugs or like the ice chest leaking. Like if all this stuff happens at once, you're like, holy shit. Like, okay, if the storm lets up and we dry all our shit out and we, drive an hour and a half and go to the store, we can get food. We can even fix our problem. But I started thinking, what if those weren't options? Like, what if I couldn't drive to the grocery at all? What if there was no gas? What if it would be fucking miserable. We love nature because we get to go visit nature. And I guarantee you don't love nature as much as you think you do. It's fucking brutal, dude. It has no care in the world to just eat you up and turn you into a different shape of nature. Like it doesn't give two fucks about you existing or not. It's going to make something else out of your body real quick. And it was brutal to see that. And we were lucky to be able to suffer through problems temporarily and they kind of relieve themselves, or us have the ability to use something from society, like drive to a gas station or whatever, and solve our problem with that. But it just made me realize every time, like, especially when you drive someplace and it's closed and it was supposed to be open, you start realizing, holy shit, how many times would I need to be able to like hear no or pull up on a closed place before I just start feeling like I'm living in the wild and like there's nobody that's got my back and I'm just fucked. Like you get that feeling pretty fast. And it was kind of a beautiful thing because it made me realize the trade-offs that we have for society are just insanely worth it. And like I've been a person who totally questioned that in the past. And I was like, man, do I just want to go live in a log cabin and like, say fuck it to all the side effects of modern society? And then I started realizing no, because I'm still relying on modern society even in that setting. Like I'm probably still gonna visit, like even if I lived in a log cabin in Alaska, every few months I'll probably go to a general store or a post office and pick up some stuff, and I'm still using society. And the fact that I'm even living in the fucking log cabin and no one's coming to like kill or rape me or try to steal my shit is because police and US government and like or Canadian government, they're like everywhere else defending all the borders. And so it's crazy that the trade-off's just enormous. Like, would you want to fight for your life just because someone else decided they like what you have? Would you like to suffer through the winter and watch one of your cousins and children die from some sickness because you're all malnourished? No, like nobody likes any of that shit. And it would happen at rates that we can't even imagine nowadays. Infectious disease, just deformities, malnutrition, starvation, drought, all kinds of shit. War, murder, rape. It was just the norm. Like that would happen all the time.
Oh
We have almost
gosh.
none of it. Now all of those things are a fucking huge news story. We're like, look at this crazy outlier. Like someone gets eaten by a crocodile in Disney World or alligator in Disney World, and it makes national news for like a year. How many babies do you think got eaten by crocodiles before and alligators? Like that wasn't a crazy thing for a predator to eat your child. So it just
Mm.
we just any small or large thing you could ever think of. It's just we're so lucky. The trade-off is so worth it. And jobs start looking really cool no matter what job you have when you realize that you're helping prop up this whole house of cards that is absolutely amazing. And it's a bubble within a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. Like the universe at large is hostile. Our atmosphere protects us from space, really. But even in the wild on Earth, in this perfect little bubble called Earth, in terms of the universe, Earth is like a fucking oasis of a king of oases. But even in that, if you had nothing, you got dropped naked in the jungle, that is a terrifying fucking place. So even that bubble sucks. And then you build like a group or a society and you have this group protection. That's another bubble. You build government and laws and regulation and police, and you actually build a hard brick house. And like sometimes, like you and me on this podcast, I am inside of a brick house, inside of a neighborhood filled with a bunch of people who all care about us and support us, surrounded by a police force that's part of several layers of government, surrounded by oceans on all sides. Like in this atmosphere of Earth, I'm in the tiniest bubble of a bubble of a bubble of a bubble in order to be able to talk about things like this. For us to talk about things like love or light or empathy, or you can't talk about any of that unless all of those other needs are met. And a lot of times we blow it off like, oh, that's not the important stuff, dude. Like we got to focus on the higher order things. The higher order things don't exist unless all the nitty gritty exists. Like the fact that we have government and money and business and streets and medicine and grocery stores and agriculture, even if it's fucking GMO, like the fact that we have it at all is the only reason you and I can spend any part of our day talking about shit like this.
I don't know that I've ever appreciated society as much as I do now. Now listening to what you just said, that is extremely insightful. And I want to take that to the next thing that you put on the network, and it's regarding, you mentioned trade-offs.
Yes.
And in this one, this is what you put in the network. You said there are no true solutions. There are only trade-offs. The positive or negative nature of this trade-off is not universal. This occurs at every level of organization and is unavoidable. Your win is someone or something else's loss, big or small, past, present, or far future, material resources or philosophical ideals. The price of entropy is paid somewhere, somehow.
Yes. So, we got any questions about that before I dive in?
No, dive in, man. Dive in. Just give me your thoughts on this thing, because that's another one I had to read about 3 or 4 times.
So, in my mind, I just call it like the trade-off rule, but it's the fact that we are beings who tell ourselves stories and we make stories about the world. And it's because of our want to talk about the world in stories and our need to stay in this kind of balanced state of life, not too hot, not too cold, not too hungry, not too full. Like, because we have to maintain homeostasis, our brains naturally define a good and a bad for us. So what we call good and bad are really just egocentric ideas of good or bad. An easy way to describe that is I'm sure termites would love to live in your house and just eat up all of your wood and just grow tons of babies and have a huge giant family with lots of space and a house. And like, it's great for them. It's the best thing that ever happened. To you, you're losing your home and it's terrible. And then you could do the opposite and kill all of them and annihilate their entire lineage and family. And they have a horrific destruction of their lineage. And now you have a termite free house and your house is great. So for your family to stay safe and to stay sheltered, that happens all the time. It happens from person to person, person to animal, between plants, and like everything you can think of. Um, Most people, they live in the home that they live now, unless they built it. But even so, sometimes that property. But every house someone's moved into, it's almost always been because people got divorced or separated, someone lost the ability to pay for that house because they got laid off, or someone died and the house had to be sold, or their partner had the house and now had to downsize. Like, whatever it is, most of the times that we have an opportunity to get a home, something that a new family may be like, this is a great joy in our life, we're having a party, this is amazing. It's only because someone had a terrible tragedy. And I mean, the very dirt that we walk on is made up of the dead bodies and crushed rocks of like everything in the past. It's just, we're literally walking on the debris of death all the time. And that's exactly what's bringing new life. And it just happens in every level. And I think what we miss out on a lot of times by telling ourselves this story of life is we talk about things in terms of good or bad, and in terms of that we will know how it will play out. But for you to call something bad today, you may not have any idea that in 15 years from now, you'd be looking back at that moment, you'd be like, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. This was a good thing. I mean, it happens to teenagers all the time. Some teenager gets heartbroken because some girl breaks his heart and he's like, the world is over. This is the worst thing that ever happened. And then 10 years later, he's married to a wonderful woman. He's like, you know what? That was the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah, right.
And I think because of that story that we tell ourselves, we miss out on reality, which is no matter what is happening right now, it is not good or it's not, and it's not bad. Something right now is having a wonderful windfall or a great time. If you're having a terrible time, it's a guarantee that something somewhere else is benefiting from your loss or will in some way. Whether it's you not even just being on the road for a moment and somebody getting a green light, or just you losing a job, someone else gets a job. You getting the shitty rotten tomato out of the pile of fruit and somebody else not grabbing that and grabbing a great tomato. Like, someone's going to take the shit on every level of organization you can think of, from the chemical level all the way up to a galactic level. I mean, something's getting fucked while something else gets something that makes them better or alive or exist at all. And that's powerful for me because I like to be able to know that if I'm having a bad time, something else is having a good time. And if it's a good time, it almost puts some perspective on it and goes, all right, I'm having a good time, but let's sit here in silence and have a moment of gratitude for whatever is giving up their success for me to be successful. Yeah, I mean, the wealthier I get, the less money is available for other people and the harder they are having to work for it. So it just, on every level, you got to be grateful for when you're winning and kind of moderate the feeling of loss, because it's only you and you're not that special.
Well, that leads perfectly into the segue to the next big insight that you put in the network. And it says that you got this from the mouth of an 8-year-old. And it goes like this: there is no great loss that doesn't provide at least some small opportunity.
Yes, it was awesome. That's my cousin's son. We went to his farm in North Carolina, and we're building a kiln out of brick and mud for him to fire some pottery in. And we kind of messed up the first go round. It was kind of falling apart. And in doing so, we found a different way to build it. And we're like, okay, this is going to be like a better way to build the whole thing anyway. And that's when he told me that. And I like stopped what I was doing. I was like, holy shit. It's like, hold on, I'm gonna go write that down. But
Wait, so he really actually said that exact same that exact
yeah,
phrase?
yeah, he just belted it out. I was like, what? Who the hell are you,
In
dude?
an 8-year-old, there
Eight.
is no great loss that doesn't provide at least some small opportunity.
He's living on a farm in North Carolina. Eight.
Oh man, wisdom.
Yeah, I
Eight
love that.
years old. That is so cool. And then you have another one. You have another insight that you post on the network, and it goes like this: we often inherently feel like the heirs of history or the makers of history. Both beliefs remove an element of humility. In reality, we are swimming or floating around in a river of moments and making small adjustments to the banks without knowing how it will impact the future flow.
Yes. Um, so my wife and I were having a conversation about that idea of the stories we tell ourselves, the very structure of the human mind, and explaining in the nature of stories. And we do that to our own life, and then we apply our own life to the context of history. And so a lot of times, because the most exciting parts of a story are the rising conflict or the beginning of the real excitement, and then the very top or the resolution, because those are the most exciting moments, we like to place ourselves in that exciting part of the story. So we look at history and we try to define it in that way. But a lot of people, almost every generation, a lot of people are talking about how this is close to the end. This is close to the end of civilization. This is, we're not going to make it much further. They like to feel like they're at the end because that's a pretty exciting part of the story. Or we think, man, we're just the creators of history, and like we're just starting and we're about to send this shit off in a way that, no one could ever believe. It's really not either. Like we don't know even how our actions are going to impact the far future. We have no idea. Something you do today that could be the most noble thing anyone ever thought of, it could play out disastrously in 180 years for some unknown like string of effects. And because we can't ever know that far or with very complex things, that really just leaves our scope of effectiveness in the realm in which we can stay humble to pretty much the near future and more of our immediate circle. And if we just keep making tweaks to that, that's about the best we can do and know that we're doing something that we value. But when people think that they're history makers, I think they have more confidence that their things they're doing now that are good will remain to be good things for everyone in the future. And then I think the people who think they're the inheritors of history, you're really just kind of acting like a spoiled child. Like, this isn't the end. We're just in an interim. You've been given a lot. And because we've been given a lot, we really need to make sure that we can keep giving to the future. So I don't think it's a good way to be either way. Got to remain humble and small.
Yeah, I mean, you never hear a young person say that we're coming up on end times. It's I mean, throughout my entire life, it's always been older people getting close to death and like, you know what, the world, this is, we're seeing the end here, and it's like just a mirror that they're holding up, potentially of themselves. But I do find that pretty comical that young people never say that stuff. It's always, people that are near and dear to the end times. All right, I have another one that you said that you wrote. This is a long one, but I really think we need to say it because it's a good one. So here it goes. It's kind of long winded, but I'll go ahead and get it off. You can kind of talk about it. The one choice enforced upon us all is to be crushed or to celebrate. If you are impoverished in a modern jungle tribe, you love and dance and share and laugh because you have nothing else. You must be this way to rise above the physical suffering. If you are born wildly wealthy with every opportunity, you love and dance and share and laugh because if you don't, you will not survive under the reality that this is as good as it gets. If you are born in the middle and progress in life, you love and dance and share and laugh because somewhere along the way, you see that achievement shifts the satisfaction bar just out of reach. If you are born in the middle and lose what you have, you love and dance and share and laugh because you have to come to understand that as things slip away, you place more value on the free things that can't be taken. No matter who you are, you will be fully forced into the dichotomy of falling into hopelessness or falling in love with life. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I like that one a lot too. That was something that came to my mind when I was looking at, we were visiting cities in the Northeast. We had been mostly in the woods and camping. And when we were passing through a bunch of these cities, I just saw people of every type. And so it just got me thinking a lot more about every way that people live, the good and the bad. And I started thinking about all kinds of people. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, man, every person that, no matter where, what station or wealth or or social position they are in life, no matter where they lived, all of the things that looked like failure to me or brought upon death were related to hopelessness. You had people who were addicted, people who were massively depressed, people who just gave up on doing anything more in life. It all had to do with hopelessness. And I looked at, super wealthy, like kids of a billionaire that just partying all the time, just loving life. And I was like, you know what? I've only ever seen people that wealthy. I've only ever seen their kids just always have fun and have a great time, or they get wildly caught up in drugs or something dangerous and just almost kill themselves every time. And I started realizing, like, maybe all of these different people that I see living, somebody who's been a welder their whole life, living in a very small countryside place in Virginia and raising horses, walking out into a field of horse shit every day, like whatever, however they live, all the successful ones are really just, they're just enjoying what they have, whatever's available to them. They're enjoying it fully as it is. It's not to say there's not a pursuit for more, but they're all the ones that are doing it right are enjoying it exactly how it is. And from that place, they're deciding what they do next about it. But they're never hopeless about their life, and they never are giving off this perception of being stuck. It's always a perception of choosing to be this way, having gratitude for it, appreciation, or just straight up celebration. That's what I just saw a lot. They're just people who celebrate the fact that life is. But I realized that you just go one way or the other. You're always taking one step one way or the other. So you might as well celebrate it. Like just just live it up. Doesn't matter who you are, you're going to have to do it anyway. If you're not consciously doing it, then you're probably taking a couple more steps towards hopelessness.
Boy, that is strong words right there. Hopelessness and feeling stuck are the two attributes that you don't see with the people who are successful or successfully, going about life.
Yeah.
And boy, that's big time. Wow. Are you as you look towards this next part of your journey and I'm assuming you've got another at least 4 months ahead. Maybe even more for this next piece of your adventure. What are you excited about now, given all of what you've learned just over the course of a few months last year?
Um, both the logistical and the emotional side of it with my wife, it's so much better. We're like a well-oiled machine now for all kinds of conflicts, and yeah, it feels more like a partnership and flow than like ever when we're out on the road. And that's not how it started at all. There's just a lot of butting heads, and uh, along the way, learning all the objective, the physical things with the logistics of it. So I'm excited about that because that part's gonna be easier. So that means that the tiny bit of responsibility we did have, which was like transporting ourselves and staying alive. Besides that, we had no responsibilities, but now we'll have even less um, because of this flow and this knowing of what needs to happen, the simplification of equipment, everything. I'm excited for that. Just more space. And now I know what gets me into these like deep headspaces the fastest, and also having a statistical awareness of like what happened over those 100 days on the road. It definitely makes you rethink some of the fears you had and be like, okay, that was kind of ridiculous for me to fear that. But then you also start thinking about the things that you actually do have to worry about. And you're like, okay, I must have not never thought about that or underplayed that, so I got to be thinking about that a little more. That's kind of cool because you just get to be more relaxed because you actually have a knowledge of where your attention needs to go instead of being hyper observational in a state of like high stakes learning, I guess. So that'll be nice. It's going to be smoother.
So it sounds like more time for daydreaming and more connection with the wife. Does your wife, does she, do you share all these insights with her? Does she relate, or does she have insights of her own? How do you communicate these insights, with her?
Um, a lot of times we'll talk about stuff like this during a hike. Uh, I kind of think and talk like this, I guess, a little more than she does. But that's not to say like some of these things, like work, for instance, like I was talking about the nature of jobs and like how when you think about it, it's like a noble thing because the jobs are guarding against the collapse of society. And so we had big conversations about that, big conversation about the bubbles. Um, but yeah, it's mostly when we're on really long hikes, it just kind of gets going because you hike 12, 14 miles, you'll talk about something.
Very cool, man. And you leave just in a couple of weeks or next week?
10 days.
10 days. All right.
Yep.
Excellent, man. Well, is there anything else that you had that we missed?
Man, I don't think so. I think we covered it all. I'd say
Because that we'll
the
do another data dump after when you get
yes,
back
that's what
for
I
the
was thinking.
second portion. You've gotten all these insights, and you just keep posting the stuff in the network, and we'll bring them back up on this podcast. Um, well, man, I so appreciate. I know everybody in the Thumos community appreciates you and appreciate your insights for thinking deeply, making us think differently, sharing your perspective. It's such an incredible thing that you have the wisdom that you have at such a young age, and the ability to go out and do this at 33 years old. So thank you for that, man. We're grateful for you in our community, and we're grateful for you to share this on the podcast, and wish you the best in daydream filled journey, on your way out, man. So thanks for being on the podcast, brother.
Thanks for having me, man.
And for all of you listening, if you like what you've heard, please remember to follow, share, give us a strong review. And if you're a man out there interested in improvement and growth, be sure to check out Thumos USA or a Thumos School for Men. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Josh, thank you, brother. We'll see y'all next time.
All right, man. Appreciate you.